Hello everybody and welcome to the definitive Japan Iceberg. This iceberg contains 10 tiers and over 100 entries, talking about all aspects of Japan, Japanese history, Japanese culture, Japanese life, media, basically anything you can think of related to Japan, it's gonna be here. If you don't know what an iceberg video is, number one, hello, welcome to my channel. I'm glad that you're here. An iceberg video is a format where you will get a specific topic, in this case Japan, and you will list information from the most commonly known to the least commonly known. These entries are ordered from what is most to least known about Japan, specifically to a non-Japanese audience. Some of these events are mainstream and well-known in Japan, but virtually unknown in other countries. Tier 1 I'm going to completely skip, and that's because it's composed of very well-known information that most all of you know. Let's be real, do you guys really want me to explain what anime and ninjas are? I wouldn't think so. Let's just jump into the interesting stuff. While tier 1 are things that most everybody knows about, chances are if you have at least a surface level of interest in Japan, you will know about these. Most everybody knows what anime is, but not everybody knows what idol or Shinto are, so let's get into tier 2. Shinto is one of Japan's native religions. Notice how I say one of, because there are actually multiple native Japanese religions. That's foreshadowing to later in the iceberg. There is a lot of foreshadowing in these early tiers. Shinto is a decentralized polytheistic faith where people worship kami, which roughly translates to spirit. Kami can refer to a myriad of supernatural entries, from deities to ghosts to folklore characters, many of which I'll talk about later in this video. Shinto is an animist religion, which means that its practitioners believe that objects possess some sort of spiritual essence. For example, shrines are believed to have specific kami that are enshrined in them, so you worship at the shrine to worship those kami. The origins of Shinto are unclear, but there is evidence that goes as far back as 2,000 years ago that shows kami veneration and worship. Some famous Shinto kami, or deities, include Ebisu, the god of fishing and good luck, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, and Daijin, the god of storms. You might recognize Ebisu from the Ebisu beer brand. Also, in Japanese harbors, you will often see Ebisu statues, which are meant to bring good luck to sailors. The Shinto cosmology is vast and complex, and I'll probably make a video explaining it one day. Shinto overlaps a lot with Japanese Buddhism, and I'll talk more about this syncretism later when I talk about Buddhism, but a lot of Japanese Buddhist deities like Kannon and even Hindu gods like Saraswati or Benzaiten are consecrated as kami in Shinto. Shinto is practiced almost exclusively in Japan, but there are some places outside of Japan where it is practiced, primarily amongst the Japanese diaspora. I actually have a whole video talking about Shinto outside of Japan if you're interested. Kawaii culture is the Japanese culture that surrounds cute things. Kawaii means cute in Japanese. Japan loves cute things. They like cute mascots, cute characters, cute people, cute animals, and they put cute little characters on everything. Like if you go to the grocery store, look at cleaning products, you will most likely find a cute mascot on it. This one is not super deep. It's more or less just Japan likes cute things. There isn't a whole lot to this. Geisha literally translates to art person, and they refer to female performing artists trained in traditional Japanese dance, singing, and conversation. They're essentially hosts and entertainers, and they're trained to be great at conversation. They used to be much more common, but nowadays you only really see traditional geisha in Kyoto. Geisha started to emerge in the 17th century as entertainers who were meant to entertain nobility, especially samurai. Geisha were a class of female entertainers that arose separate from prostitutes. Now, there is a common misconception that geishas are prostitutes, but their origins came, once again, specifically as a class of entertainers distinct from prostitutes. Prostitution was a large part of life for Japanese noblemen back in the day. Geisha were part of the nightlife aspect, but they were not prostitutes. Sure, there have been geisha that have had sexual relationships with their clients, but that is the exception, not the rule. Seppuku is ritual suicide that was practiced by the samurai class in feudal Japan. This practice involves eviscerating oneself and having a second person decapitate you immediately afterwards. Only good thoughts on this channel. It was done as a means to protect someone's honor if they did something shameful. This practice started in the late Heian period of the 12th century, and it was typically done after defeat in battle. Sometimes though, seppuku would go even farther and involved ending someone's bloodline, which involved killing any male offspring of the recipient. It was a part of the Bushido, or Samurai Code of Honor, and the practice continued all the way up into World War II, far beyond when the samurai became obsolete. In fact, there were several generals in World War II that committed seppuku in the Pacific Theater after captured by the Americans. The most recent and famous case of seppuku was done by a novelist and Japanese nationalist Yukio Mishima, who I will talk about later in this video. TLDR, he attempted a coup against the Japanese government, and when it failed, he committed seppuku in 1970. And he did it the traditional way, where someone else is there and cuts your head off, so yeah. The word otaku means two things. In Japan, it refers to someone who has a hyperfixation on a certain hobby. This typically refers to people who are hardcore into anime and video games, but it can really be anything. You'll see otaku who love military technology, cars, movies, music, really anything. Outside of Japan though, the word has a different connotation, and it refers to people who are big fans of anime and manga. I am one of these kinds of otakus. If you are in Japan, I would, however, not recommend that you call yourself an otaku because the word has negative connotations there. Otakus are sometimes viewed as strange or obsessive, but in my view, so long as you're not hurting anybody, like what you like. Though I'm not like this anymore, from the ages of 15 to about 20, I was a hardcore otaku, and I collected tons of anime merchandise and manga. I sadly don't have any pictures of my old bedroom, but it was like an anime museum. It was so colorful and I had so many figures. I was constantly changing up my collection. Just imagine a lot of Toho, Lucky Star, and Haruhi Suzumiya merchandise everywhere. Also Vocaloids. I had a lot of Miku figures. Ironically though, after moving to Japan at age 21, I almost entirely shifted away from otaku culture, and I didn't watch anime for like a year or two. I still enjoy anime, but I don't watch it nearly as much as I did when I was a teenager. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, one in Hiroshima and the second in Nagasaki. The bombs were nicknamed Fat Man and Little Boy, dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima respectively. Fat Man was a plutonium bomb and Little Boy was a uranium bomb. The bombings killed about 145,000 people in Hiroshima and 74,000 in Nagasaki, so about 250,000 people total. For perspective, this is what 250,000 people looks like. These are just the people that were killed by the end of 1945. There were many more people that died of radiation poisoning in the following decades. Survivors of the bombing are called hibakusha, and many of them live to tell the tale of their experience with the bomb, and they've told pretty horrific stories. Due to the nature of the bombing, the radiation dissipated relatively quickly after the explosion, which is why Hiroshima and Nagasaki are safe to live in today. In fact, I used to live in Nagasaki, a couple miles away from Ground Zero. There seems to be a misconception about Hiroshima and Nagasaki that the culture of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are completely surrounding the bomb. I can't say about Hiroshima because I've never been there, but what I can say is that living in Nagasaki, the fact that it was bombed was sort of like part of the history, of course, but it wasn't a part of daily life. When Japanese people talk about Nagasaki, they don't talk about the bomb. They talk about Christianity, or they talk about it being open to the Dutch and the Portuguese. They talk about the foreign influence. They talk about the food, seafood specifically. The bomb is usually one of the last things they mention about Nagasaki. And same with Hiroshima. When I've heard most Japanese people talk about Hiroshima, they talk about the tourist attractions and they talk about the temper that Hiroshima people are stereotyped to have. I've never met anyone from Hiroshima, so I can't say whether it's accurate or not. I did go to the Atomic Bomb Museum, though, in Nagasaki with a Japanese friend of mine, and it was a pretty harrowing experience, to say the least. Though Japan and America thankfully have a really great relationship today, the bombings are still a source of controversy, and understandably so. Some people view them as a necessary evil to end the war, but others view it as needlessly brutal destruction. But I think we can all agree that it was a tragedy nonetheless. On July 8, 2022, at 11:30 a.m., former Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe was shot and killed near Yamato Saidaiji Station in Nara. At the time, Abe was giving a speech in support of the Liberal Democratic Party candidate Sato Kei. The Liberal Democratic Party is a very influential political party in Japan. The Japanese name is Jiminto, but this party is somewhat controversial. The accused perpetrator is a man named Yamagami Tetsuya, who ran up on Abe and shot him using a homemade firearm since guns are very difficult to obtain in Japan. Yamagami's motives were due to Abe's ties with the Unification Church, which is a massive religious organization and borderline cult operated out of South Korea. I'm not going to go too deep into them because they're Korean and they're not Japanese, but to keep a long story short, they're a post-Christian movement, sometimes called Moonies, based on their founder's Sun Moon. Many people view the organization as being exploitative, using predatory tactics to try and siphon money from their followers. I actually spoke to a couple Japanese friends of mine about the Unification Church and asked what their opinions on it were, and their opinions were pretty negative to say the least. Yamagami was one such person who blamed the church for manipulating his bereaved mother into donating money to essentially secure her a spot in heaven. So he murdered Abe in order to get revenge on the church, and he had plans to kill the whole Moon family. Yamagami is sort of like the Japanese version of Luigi Mangione. A lot of people view him as a rebel who fought against an unjust and exploitative system, but there are also a lot of people who view him as just another murderer who wanted some sort of justification to commit a crime. But since this event, coupled with the death of Sun Moon from old age, the influence of the Unification Church in Japan has decreased, specifically in its politics world. Isolationism, also known as sakoku in Japanese, and I'm just going to call it sakoku from now on, started in the 1600s under the Tokugawa shogunate. During the beginning of the Edo period, Japan was very skeptical about foreign influence, specifically Portuguese and Catholic influence. Catholic missionaries from Europe, mostly Portugal, but also Spain, had introduced Christianity to the Japanese, and the ruling class at the time, while some adopted it, many viewed it as a threat to their power. I will go further in depth on Japanese Christianity later in the iceberg, since there's a lot of interesting stuff here, but let's just leave it at that for now. Sakoku lasted for about 250 years, and it was officially ended on July of 1853, when American Commodore Matthew Perry showed up at the Bay of Edo, modern-day Tokyo, with a fleet of ships. He proposed a treaty to open Japan up to trade with America and to help shipwrecked American sailors on Japanese shores. The shogunate, however, refused to accept Perry's demand, so a year later Perry showed up with an even larger fleet of ships, and eventually the shogunate caved in, and the Treaty of Kanagawa was signed. This treaty allowed the opening of two Japanese ports, Shimoda and Hakodate, to American ships. This was huge, and it completely structured how Japan operated as a country. And this more or less led to the Meiji Restoration, which completely restructured Japan, and I'll talk about that later. But for the first time in about 250 years, Japan was open to foreigners. Before then, the only people that were allowed into Japan were the Dutch in Kyushu, and they were relegated to a small town in Nagasaki called Dejima, and the occasional Chinese merchant. Though Japan is a lot more internationalized today, the effects of Sakoku are still felt in modern-day Japan. Even though Japan is not as anti-foreign as it used to be, that sentiment still sort of exists, and Japan in general is relatively wary of other countries and tries its best to be self-sustaining. Idols are young, typically female performers that sing and dance, and they typically come in idol groups. Idols are marketed for their youthfulness and talent with singing and dancing. Most idols come packaged with a very girly and cute aesthetic meant to appeal to grown men. Yeah, idol culture is a pretty controversial topic, to say the least. It has a lot of criticism because a lot of people believe that it is exploitative of young performers, girls who want to get into the music industry, and the only way they can do it is by becoming an idol and not being paid very much, having to work really strict conditions. But a lot of people like idol groups and idols just for the aesthetic of it and for the music, which I totally understand. But idols exist beyond the scope of just music. There are also virtual idols like VTubers, who I will talk about later. And there is a lot of idol-themed video games and anime, like Love Live School Idol Project and The Idol Master. Also Vocaloids, which I'll talk about on Tier 3, are virtual idols. Kabuki is a style of Japanese theater known for its elaborate costumes and makeup. It started in the Edo period and is one of Japan's most well-known art forms. This famous painting here, if you've seen it, is actually a painting of Kabuki actor Onji Otani. The most famous Kabuki play is probably Shibaraku, which surrounds the historical figure Kamakura Gongoro Kagemasa, a samurai from the Heian period. I will elaborate more on Japanese theater when I talk about Na drama and bunraku in later tiers, but Kabuki is most people's introduction to Japanese theater, and it's highly recognizable due to its stylization of costumes and makeup. Kabuki literally translates to song dance skill, or the skill of singing and dancing, which makes a lot of sense because Kabuki is very much a high art and takes a lot of time to master. Kabuki actors historically have been highly celebrated members of society. In fact, in the Meiji era and the Edo period, these actors were essentially celebrities of their time. Kabuki is also known for being all male, with men cross-dressing and playing female characters. Nowadays, Kabuki isn't as popular as it used to be, but fans of theater will typically go to see Kabuki if they are in Japan. I've never seen Kabuki myself, but I personally really want to go because it looks really cool. But before that, let's get into the sponsor of today's video, Tokyo Treat. Tokyo Treat is a fun and exclusive Japanese snack subscription box filled with limited edition Kit Kats, specialty flavored Japanese chips, seasonal treats, and occasional Japanese sodas that are only available in Japan for a limited time. If you guys remember. Oh, wow, look at that. All right, we have this right here, the Sakura Castella, which is great because I actually used to live in Nagasaki, and Nagasaki is very famous for their castellas, so let's try this. All right. There's good. Matcha latte Kit Kats from Ito-En, which is my favorite tea brand of all time. That is great. Let's try these. That is pretty. I like these a lot. Each box includes a cultural guide booklet. Learn more about the snacks you receive as well as allergen information. The booklet also contains a wealth of information about Japanese culture, similar to what you'll see on my channel. Oh my god, they got umaibo in here. Oh my lord, look at that. Umaibo, if you don't know, it's Japan's cheapest snack. Essentially like a giant Cheeto. These are so good. Smells good, look at that. It looks like a giant hot Cheeto, and there's a hole in the middle, so that way kids don't choke. All right. Oh, I missed these. I haven't had this flavor since I was in Japan. Once again, thank you very much to Tokyo Treat for sponsoring this video. If you want to pick up the April box, make sure to use my link in the description and code FreeBird for $5 off your first order. Also, you have to use my link in the description below. If you do not use my link and my code, I do not get paid for these ad reads. So use my link. My link. Thank you very much. Tier 3, we're starting to get below the waters a bit. Now that you've dipped your head under the water, you can see just how deep we're gonna go. This is where the journey really begins. The Meiji Restoration refers to a period of time that lasted from 1868 to 1889. During this short 21-year time span, Japan overthrew the Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled over Japan for about 200 years prior. They also removed the feudal system, centralized the government around Emperor Meiji, for whom the Meiji Restoration is named after, and they also greatly adopted Western technology and heavily industrialized the nation. This period of history is really where modern Japan as we know it started to solidify. Japanese life changed greatly in just a generation, and it was able to do this so quickly because of Japan's strong national identity and desire to catch up, for lack of a better term, to other world powers like America and the British Empire. A lot of this rapid change happened because of the end of isolation, which I spoke about in Tier 2. Furthermore, Japan saw how their neighbor China had fallen to imperial Western powers, and they did not want the same to happen to them. The Meiji Restoration kicked off what would be about a century of extreme change for Japan, and the effect of the Meiji Restoration really lasted up until the end of World War II. Yokai literally translates to strange wonder, and they are Japanese supernatural folklore creatures. Some famous yokai that you might have heard of are the Kappa, Gashadokuro, Tsuchinoko, and Yuki Onna. They are creatures that typically cause mischief, but some of them can be auspicious and fortunate. I'm not going to go too deep into yokai because I already made a video on them and there are hundreds of these things. I would hesitate to call them cryptids because they're kind of not, and that would be applying a modern day internet meme word onto classical Japanese folklore characters, but they kind of are like cryptids because there are some people that swear that yokai exist, and there are others that just view them as fun campfire stories. Japanese history is split up into several distinct historical eras or periods. The list goes as follows: Paleolithic era starting around 35,000 BCE, Jomon about 14,000 BCE, Yayoi 1000 BCE, Kofun 300, Asuka 538, Nara 710, Heian 794, Kamakura 1185, Muromachi 1336, Azuchi Momoyama 1573, Edo 1603, Meiji 1868, Taisho 1912, Showa 1926, Heisei 1989, and Reiwa 2019 to the present day. There are some unofficial Japanese periods too, like the Yamato period, which refers to the stretch of time in ancient Japan where the Yamato ethnic group and culture started to form. This period is from about 250 to 710, and it overlaps with the late Yayoi period, the Kofun period, and the Asuka period. Also, there is the Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period, which lasted from about 1467 to 1615. This is not to be confused with the Warring States period in China, which happened 2,000 years earlier, but the Warring States period in Japan was what led to the Tokugawa shogunate. These eras are helpful because they provide a simple way to categorize stretches of time, and it makes learning about Japanese history much easier in my opinion. I have earlier in this video said that things happened during different eras, like during the Meiji era, or the Edo period, or the Showa era, or whatever. The words period and era are more or less interchangeable. The Japanese word for these time periods is jidai, which can be translated as era or period, so it is acceptable. Aokigahara, colloquially known as the Suicide Forest, is a forest in the Tokyo Prefecture. It's called the Suicide Forest because it has historically been a popular spot for people to commit suicide, with about 30 people a year taking their lives. 30 might not seem like much at first, but that's like one person every 2 weeks or so, which is very sad. This place is a very popular place to visit because it is very pretty, and a lot of people come here just for the scenery. But there are some people who go there because it's the spooky suicide forest, and I know I'm sounding a little condescending by saying that, but honestly, this sort of tragedy tourism and the mysticism that surrounds this place and places like this really bugs the hell out of me. This is a place where real people go to die, and It sucks seeing people blatantly disrespect it. If you decide to visit this place, there is a very real chance that you can find a dead body. There are dozens of them that people retrieve from the forest every year, but there are certain parts of the forest that are completely safe to visit and just pretty scenery with trees. Line is a Japanese social media app similar to WhatsApp that's used by virtually every smartphone user in Japan. People use this instead of texting, and it's basically necessary for communication. Line is much more than just a direct messaging platform. It is an app that people use for payment. People get their news through Line. The way you customize your Line can really show what kind of personality you have. And Line comes with its own etiquette that is very different from texting. For example, it's considered pretty impolite to ask for someone's line when you first met them, unless it's business related. Also, typically Japanese people take a very long time to respond to your messages, sometimes even days. This is for a variety of reasons. Mostly it's because if you've seen a Japanese person's line, they usually have hundreds, if not thousands of notifications, so yours sort of gets lost in the mix. Also, people do not respond right away because they see your message, they just don't open it, and they want time to think of the perfect response. For example, if I ask my friend if he wants to hang out this weekend, there are one of two responses I could get. One response is yes, that would be nice, and the other response is yes, can we meet at Saturday at 7 p.m. The first response is essentially akin to saying no. Japan is a very indirect culture, and people will very rarely flat out tell you no. So in order to use Line properly, you sort of need to take this into account and learn a bit about Japanese pragmatics and social etiquette. And it can be pretty difficult for foreigners to pick up. I certainly had a hard time with it, but you gotta roll with the punches and realize that it's just growing pains. Overall though, I really like Line and I think it's a really good app for communication. I vastly prefer it to texting. There's a thing you can do where you can have a Line automatic translator and you can make a group chat with you and the person you're texting and then the automatic translator. So when you text each other, your texts will automatically translate if you're texting in different languages. It's pretty brilliant. Vocaloid is a kind of software that synthesizes vocals. These vocals are typically paired with characters. The most famous one is Hatsune Miku. If you do not know who Hatsune Miku is, stop watching this video right now and go look up Hatsune Miku on YouTube and watch Hatsune Miku videos. Then come back here and leave a comment telling me that you did your homework and watched Hatsune Miku videos. Actually do it right now. I'm not even kidding. These characters have a large online presence and live concerts where holograms of these characters perform and dance for massive audiences. Maybe perform is the wrong word because it's an animation and it's completely predetermined, but you know what I mean. Hatsune Miku was the first Vocaloid to gain any mainstream popularity, but other Vocaloids have existed before her. In fact, the Vocaloid software was first created in the year 2000 and was released by 2004 by company Zero-G. Zero-G had generic male and female voice banks, Leon and Lola, which do have their own characters nowadays, and you will hear songs by them. Later that year, Krypton and Future Media would release Vocaloid 1 with the more recognizable characters Meiko and Kaito, which you've probably heard of if you like Vocaloid. So fun fact, Meiko and Kaito are actually older than Hatsune Miku. In the past 20 years or so, many characters and voice banks have been added to the Vocaloid canon. There are many unofficial Vocaloid-esque characters too, typically called Utaloids. And Utao is a freeware version of Vocaloid. Utao literally means sing in Japanese. There are tons of Utaloids. Since most anyone can make an Utaloid using their own voice, it was what people did before AI voice replicating became a thing. So if you wanted SpongeBob to sing a song for you back in 2016, for example, you would have to make a SpongeBob Utaloid instead of running it through an AI program. The most famous Utaloid is probably Kasane Teto, and she is an Utaloid. A lot of people think she was a Vocaloid, and that's because she was created specifically to troll Vocaloid fans. Teto is also my favorite Vocaloid because her origin story is very hilarious. Her name is Kasane, and the kanji used literally translate to heavy sound, and she's 31 years old. Which I think is pretty funny because most Vocaloids are either teenagers or in their early 20s. And she was released on April 1st, 2008, which, you know, She's a joke character. Also, her favorite food is baguettes, which is a parody of Miku and the leak meme. For copyright reasons, I can't play any Kasane Teto songs, but I would recommend Triple Baka and Fukireta. I mean, Triple Baka does not have a whole lot of Teto in it. It's mostly Miku, but, you know, she's there. Official Vocaloid songs that I would recommend would be Miku by Anna Managuchi. That is probably the most popular, Jesus. Probably the most popular Vocaloid song of the past 10 years, and for good reason. It is a really good song. Laboratory by Rail featuring Rin and Gumi is also really good too. It's a really weird song and the lyrics are really strange, but I do like it. On the topic of weird songs that I also really like that are Vocaloid, I would suggest listening to Party Junkie by Satsuki ga Tenkamori. It's a little darker, but it has this really badass electro instrumental that I love. Wildfire by Crusher P featuring Gumi is really good too. And the Kikuo project, Kikuo Miku by Japanese producer Kikuo, is pretty good. I like it quite a bit. Aishite, 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 that is a good song. Kanji are Chinese characters that are used in Japanese and take up a bulk of the Japanese writing system. The way Japanese works is that there are 3 writing systems: hiragana, katakana, and kanji. Hiragana and katakana are both syllabaries, which means that each character represents a syllable. Kanji, however, are logographs, where each character represents a concept or a thing. Note, neither of these are alphabets, so stop calling the Japanese writing system the Japanese alphabet. It's not an alphabet. It's a writing system. Not all writing systems are alphabets. The reason why Japanese uses a hybrid writing system is because of history. Originally, Japanese had no written form, so about 1300 years ago, they bridged over Chinese characters to write Japanese. I have a whole video about this if you want to know the origins of the Japanese language, but Japanese is very difficult to write with only Chinese characters, so over the centuries, people developed hiragana and katakana to write things like verb endings, particles, and other grammatical components. You could theoretically write Japanese using only hiragana or katakana, but it would be very confusing since Japanese has a lot of homophones where the only thing that differentiates the word in writing is what kanji they use. Also, kanji just look really cool. If you're a fan of the channel, you'll know that I love kanji. I've made tons of videos about kanji, and I have a couple kanji dictionaries, one of them containing close to 6,000 characters. For those of you who are learning Japanese or want to learn Japanese, do not be afraid by that number. Japanese does not use 6,000 characters, they use roughly 2,100, so you only need to learn a third of that. I don't know if that makes you feel any better, but, you know, it's easier than 6,000. A lot of learners and even natives have a hard time learning kanji, which, I mean, yeah, it's complicated, but personally, the complexity is what I like about it, so it doesn't really bother me. The Ainu are one of the indigenous ethnic groups surrounding the Sea of Okhotsk, stemming from Hokkaido, the Kuril Islands, and the Russian island of Sakhalin and the Kamchatka Peninsula, but they mostly live in Hokkaido and northern Tohoku. These people are incorrectly referred to as Japan's native ethnic group, which is not entirely true because, well, they don't only come from Japan, they come from that whole area in the Sea of Okhotsk, and there are other ethnic groups too that were indigenous to Japan before the Yayoi people came. And I will talk about those other groups later, but I digress. These people have been living in Japan for thousands of years, and they're ethnically distinct from the modern Japanese Yamato majority ethnic group. But their origin is difficult to trace for many reasons. The Ainu have basically been near assimilated into the Yamato culture of Japan, and in 2023, there were as few as 11,000 self-identifying Ainu throughout Japan. Although the number of people who are Ainu is most likely much larger due to people either unknowingly carrying Ainu blood or deliberately concealing their heritage for fear of discrimination. These people have historically been victims of oppression by both Japan and Russia and live in relative obscurity, but you will still find the Ainu language and Ainu villages in Hokkaido, predominantly in Ainu towns like Shiroi and Nibutani. The Ainu are known for their distinctive beards on men and facial tattoos, and they dress in a way that is much more similar to people that are native to Siberia. They're a people without a nation, a people whose culture has been not really well preserved. So there is a lot of mystery revolving them. A lot of Ainu traditions, aspects of their language and religion have not really been preserved or even documented very much. So it is a little bit difficult to research about the Ainu. The sarin gas attacks refer to the 1995 terrorist attack by cult Aum Shinrikyo. Aum Shinrikyo is a doomsday cult that orchestrated a gas attack on the Tokyo subway system. They did this because they believed that the world was going to end soon and they needed to speed up the process by committing mass violence. To keep a long story short, they believed in the Kali Yuga, the Hindu belief that the universe exists in cycles of destruction. This is a wild distortion of the Hindu belief in Kali Yuga. Hindus do not believe that you need to commit violence in order to usher in a new age of destruction and the ending of the world. This is a fringe extremist group that twisted the beliefs of Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and other religions, and they used it for their own evil, nefarious purposes. They committed this violence by using sarin, which is a toxic nerve agent that was developed by the Nazis of all people, so that's wonderful. This was the deadliest act of domestic terror in modern-day Japan, killing 13 people and injuring close to 6,000. This event shook Japan so deeply and affected millions of people firsthand. For perspective, Tokyo is massive. It's the most populous city in the world, and the Tokyo subway station traffics millions of commuters a day, even 30 years ago back in the 90s. So even people that were not directly affected by the gas were still caught in the shock. This event scarred the Japanese public, and today, 30 years later, people will still give you strange looks if you mention this in mixed company. City pop is a genre of music that was made in the 1980s, which reflected the glamorous Japanese city life of the time. In the 80s, the Japanese economy was better than it had ever been, and this music reflected that shiny, optimistic sentiment. It is categorized by its soaring vocals, upbeat, big band, jazz, funk, disco, pop, rock, fusion instrumentals, lush horn sections, groovy bass lines, and synthesizers. This genre was really big in the 80s, but it sort of lay dormant for a while and it became sort of a dated sound, but it saw a resurgence of popularity in the 2010s when a genre of music called future funk heavily sampled these Japanese disco funk records from the 80s. Artists like Young Bae, Saint Pepsi, and Macross 8299 resurrected this genre and introduced it to a new Western audience. Some of the most popular city pop songs are Plastic Love by Maria Takeuchi, Stay With Me by Miki Matsubara, and Dress Down by Kaoru Akimoto. I personally love city pop, and I was really surprised by how few people in Japan actually listen to it nowadays. Like, I was expecting to go there and have people look fondly on city pop, sort of like how people in America look back on 80s pop music, but whenever I'd be doing karaoke and I'd sing a song by Tatsuro Yamashita, everybody would always comment on how unusual it was that I was doing this old Showa era music. Some city pop albums that I'd recommend are Adventure by Momoko Kikuchi, For You by Tatsuro Yamashita, and Timeless by Andi. Specifically that last one, Andi is great and Timeless is a fantastic record. There are so many bangers. I would highly recommend checking it out. It's just so good. The term bubble economy refers to an economic bubble in the late 80s. If you don't know what an economic bubble is, look at the graph. It looks nothing like a bubble. It looks more like a giant mountain to me, but well, whatever, I guess. In the late 80s, the Japanese real estate and stock prices greatly inflated to the point where in 1992, they crashed and the Japanese economy plateaued and it still hasn't really recovered from it. In the 1970s and 80s, Japan was at the forefront of technology and innovation, but since the bubble burst, Japan has been more or less stuck in the 90s economically and somewhat technologically. Sure, Japan has modern computers and smartphones, but there are still processes that are stuck in the past. For example, many people pay with cash instead of digital payment or even credit cards. and businesses will fax each other documents all the time instead of just emailing digital copies. Japan has a reputation for being super technologically advanced, but that is like only in Tokyo. I'll see all these videos online of server robots and high-tech bathrooms and all that. That only exists in Tokyo. You're not going to find that in Saga. So no, Japan is not living in 2050. They're living in 1998 with a little bit of 2050 tossed in. Since the economic bubble burst, Japanese work culture has become much more harsh. Japanese work culture typically prioritizes conformity over efficiency, and many processes are made needlessly complex for the sake of tradition. Ask anybody who works in a Japanese company about zangyo, and you'll know what I mean. All of you people who have worked in a Japanese company, I bet you just had shivers go down your spine when I said zangyo. This toxic work culture is probably the leading factor in Japan's population crisis, since work is so demanding that less people are having families, mostly because they simply don't have enough time to raise them. But since the COVID-19 pandemic, the Japanese government has made efforts to move forward and modernize a lot of their technology. Personally, I think Japan will be fine. Japan has a long history of doing one thing for a very long time and then rapidly changing when they realize it's not working. So I do see Japan sometime in the future completely overhauling their technology and becoming world-leading innovators again. Or at least I hope this is the case, and I hope it happens sooner rather than later. Karoushi, or death from overwork, is a phenomenon directly related to Japan's harsh work culture that I spoke about in the last entry. This relates to things like heart attacks, strokes, malnutrition, stress-related illness, or even suicide from workplace pressure. Japanese work culture is incredibly demanding, and people often work long hours, 6 or even 7 days a week. I had a friend of mine who used to work as a salaryman, and he said that he would work 10 to 12-hour shifts 7 days a week. That's every single day. Japan is not the only country that deals with this. Their neighbors, China, have it actually a whole lot worse, and as do other countries like India and Indonesia. There have been many surveys and stories of Japanese workers who have spoken about working 100-hour work weeks, or even working for like days and days and days and days straight without taking any time off. Once again, though, the pandemic has shifted how the world and Japan approaches work, and certain local governments are trying to fix this problem, like Tokyo's 4-day work week. So hopefully this problem gets better, because Japan is quite literally working itself to death. Hikikomori is a word for the phenomenon of adult shut-ins who rarely, if ever, leave their house or apartments, and they choose to live in complete isolation. These last couple entries have been very depressing, and it's gonna get worse. In Japan, there are an estimated 1.5 million people who live like this. People who become chronically reclusive due to a variety of factors. Typically, this is caused by anxiety, depression, social phobias, or other mental health issues that people face. Japan in general does a poor job at caring for mental health, so people who deal with these conditions, along with the stress of conforming to Japanese social norms, shut themselves in and spend their days on the internet, watching television, playing video games, or really any form of entertainment. This issue has gotten so bad that it's estimated about 1.2% of people in Japan are hikikomori, which is about 1 in 100. Japan is not the only country where this is a big deal, though. Other East Asian countries like South Korea, China, and Hong Kong deal with this. You might have heard the term NEET in certain otaku circles, not in education, employment, or training. It is sort of a meme used to describe these kinds of people, usually hikikomori, that spend their days watching anime. Personally, I have known some people who have basically become hikikomori when they moved to Japan. I knew about 3 of them. One was Chinese, one was British, and one was American. Within the first month that they were in Japan, they were having fun, but something in them just sort of snapped and they became recluses, basically spending all of their time in their room, not going to class, not socializing, not doing anything. They became hikikomori. If you do struggle with mental health, Japan can be a very difficult place to live, sadly. I actually am diagnosed with GAD, or generalized anxiety disorder. And I have had times in Japan where my anxiety has been really bad, and I have had almost nobody in my immediate life to discuss with it, because that is not something that people typically talk about in Japan. But the Japanese government is working to try and solve this issue through providing online resources, but I do not know how effective these are. One thing that I've heard helps is exposure therapy, where each day you go outside for increasing amounts of time and distance. One week you start just by walking out on your doorstep for a few minutes every day, and the next week you walk out a little bit further, and then a little bit further, and then etc. Take what I have to say with a grain of salt. I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, and I've never dealt with this. Buddhism is a religion that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. It's widely practiced all over the world, especially in Japan. I decided to put this a little lower than Shinto, since the origins of Japanese Buddhism are pretty complex, and there are many different Japanese Buddhist movements. But to keep things brief, the Japanese adopted Chinese-style Buddhism in the Asuka period about 1500 years ago, and it quickly became a part of life of the nobility. At one point, it was Japan's official state religion. For the longest time in Japan, Shinto was something that was practiced more by the common folk, and Buddhism more by the elites, and that's because the Japanese elites really wanted to be like their contemporary Chinese counterparts. During the Warring States period, though, Buddhism started to be adopted more by the common people, because Buddhist scholars at the time believed that the cause of the Warring States period was dharmic decline amongst Japan. If you don't know what dharma is essentially the way of things acting in accordance with the dharma leads to enlightenment, and they believed Japan was not acting like that. So Buddhism became much more adopted by the common folk. Today, Japan practices a syncretic combination of Shinto and Buddhism, with a little bit of Taoist and Confucian beliefs thrown in for good measure. There is a saying that the Japanese are born Shinto and die Buddhist, which means that Shinto deals with coming-of-age rituals like certain birthdays, marriage, etc., and Japanese funerals are typically Buddhist. In Japanese graveyards, you will often see statues of Buddhist gods and other figures like Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The syncretism of Shinto and Buddhism is very complex, and I could make a huge video about it, and I might one day because I'm a big nerd when it comes to anything related to religion and spirituality. But to keep things brief, the way you tell a Shinto shrine from a Buddhist temple in Japan is that Shinto shrines will have the torii gates that I spoke about earlier, and temples do not. Also, temples oftentimes have a really large bell, and they're colored differently. Weeaboos refer to non-Japanese people, usually Westerners, who obsess over Japanese pop culture, specifically anime, manga, and related media. They obsess over this to the extent where they renounce their own culture and make complete fools of themselves. Weeaboos believe that Japan is like how it is in anime, sometimes to the extent where they end up being unintentionally racist towards Japanese people, and very demeaning towards their own cultures. If I were a weeaboo, I would essentially say that I love Japan, and America's a terrible place, and I want to move to Japan because I saw Haruhi Suzumiya, and Japan is going to be just like that. It's a very immature way of looking at the world. Weeaboos are not as common now as they used to be, and they are very distinctive from otakus, as I mentioned in Tier 2. You can be someone who likes anime and Japanese pop culture, even to an extreme extent, without being a weeaboo. Weeaboo is specifically a person who denounces their own culture and views Japan as a superior, amazing country just because of anime. Weeaboo is not used as much nowadays as it was maybe 10 years ago, but the term weeb, which is shorthand for weeaboo, has become an inside term for anime fans to refer to each other. I am an anime fan, as I stated during the otaku entry. When I was younger, I would refer to myself and my friends affectionately and jokingly as weebs, even though we weren't actual weeaboos. If you want a more in-depth analysis on these kinds of people, I highly suggest watching Filthy Frank's video on them. It is a classic of 2010's YouTube satire edginess, and I love it, and it is so funny, and Filthy Frank quit making YouTube videos to make music about being sad, and Now I'm sad because we don't get any more Filthy Frank. But anyways, that'll be the end of Tier 3 and the end of Part 1 of the Japan Iceberg. Thank you so much for watching. This part isn't scripted. I'm just going to yap for a little bit. What I'm going to do with these is record audio. I'm not going to record any face cam for these because, I mean, I'm going to be realistic. It would take me way too long to edit these and put them out if I kept my face cam in. And I have, you know, a job, so I don't have the time to do all that and put these out in a reasonable pace and also still write them and research them and all that. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to release several of these really big videos, and then when I'm done, I'm going to compile a massive supercut, which probably will be maybe around 10 or 11 hours. It's going to be pretty big, but I'm going to dump that on my channel. So once the series is complete, you can just binge and watch the whole video or put it on in the background while you're doing things. I know this is a highly anticipated video for a lot of you. A lot of you have been asking where the Japanese culture iceberg went and what happened to my explanation videos for it. Well, they've all been taken down, and I have this completely new series for all of you, so I hope you enjoy this. I originally made a Japanese culture iceberg in March of 2024, about a year ago as of recording this audio. I scrapped the original project, and I've decided to continue by remaking a completely new iceberg. I did this for several reasons. Number one is that the original iceberg had a lot of flaws. There were many entries that didn't fit at all, and it also contained some content that I'm no longer comfortable talking about on this channel, like NSFW related content and certain true crime related stories. Originally, I wanted to do the classic spooky iceberg type video, but it felt really wrong in execution. I have kept some of the more disturbing entries, but only because I find them to be particularly relevant to Japan's history or society. Also, if you believe that I got any information incorrect today, let me know. Leave a comment because I might do a corrections video at the very end of this series. I'm going to be completely dedicating myself to the Japanese Culture Iceberg project until it's complete. So for the next maybe 2 months or so, I'm going to only be releasing Japanese Culture Iceberg videos, main series videos. I might do, you know, yapping videos like the one on the state of my channel, but I digress. But if you enjoyed this video, thank you so much for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons for helping support what I do. If you want your name in the credits, you want to see videos a day early, or you want to get access to exclusive content not on this channel, make sure to join my Patreon, link in the description. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.